Member for Abbotsford Mission.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. British Columbia has built a global reputation as a destination for world-class education. Students travel from every corner of the world to study here, to build futures, to support families back home, to contribute to our communities, and to invest in the promise of Canada. International education is not a small program. It is a multi-billion-dollar sector. It supports jobs, it strengthens communities, it enriches classrooms, it connects British Columbia to the world. But let us be equally clear. Where there is growth, there must also be accountability. Where there are vulnerable students navigating a foreign system, there must be protection. And where government proposes new regulatory powers, there must be an inspection. Bill 7, the Postsecondary International Education Designated Institutions Act, replaces the previous Education Quality Assurance Framework with a designation system. The government's stated purpose is to protect international students and safeguard British Columbia's reputation. Madam Speaker, that is the goal we support. We support credible oversight. We support removing bad actors. We support transparency. We support protecting international students from exploitation. But we must examine whether this bill strikes the right balance. Because while protection is essential, so too is fairness. While oversight is necessary, so too is due process. And while reputation matters, so too does regulatory restraint. Under the previous system, operated as an administrative framework, this bill removes that framework into a statute. This change is not insignificant. When government shifts from policy guidance to legislative enforcement powers, it is not merely procedural, it is structural. Bill 7 creates a mandatory designation certificate system. Under Clause 2, institutions must not advise, offer, contract with, enroll, or deliver programs to international students without a valid designation certificate. This is a significant tightening of authority. It moves beyond recognition. It moves into prohibition. It moves into enforcement backed by inspection, cancellation, and reapplication bans. Madam Speaker, legislation of this kind must be examined not for what it intends to prevent, but for how it exercises power. Clause 3 defines legible institutions. Clause 4 sets out the application process. Clause 5 outlines the criteria and factors for designation. On the surface, these factors appear reasonable. Continuing of programs, clear information to students, safe, positive experience, services that promote well-being, protection of BC's reputation, all commendable goals. But when we look closer at Clause 5(3), we see the administrator may consider any other factors that the administrator considers relevant. That is extremely broad. And when criteria are open-ended, discretion expands. When discretion expands, predictability, I can really speak today. Predictability diminishes. And when predictability diminishes, institutions and students face uncertainty. We must ask, what safeguards ensure consistency of decisions? What metrics define reputation risk? What prevents uneven application? The bill does not clearly define these limits. Clause 8 allows the administrator to impose, amend, or remove terms and conditions on a designation certificate at any time. At any time, not just at renewal, not just upon proven non-compliance, at any time. This grants ongoing regulatory controls over institutions, even those acting in good faith. Madam Speaker, we must ensure that flexibility does not become unpredictability. Institutions plan years ahead, staffing, facilities, student intake, housing, academic partnerships. If terms can shift at any time without clearly defined thresholds, that creates operational instability. We support accountability, but accountability must be paired with clarity. So let's examine enforcement. Clause 15 through 17 authorize inspections. Inspectors may enter business premises during business hours without a warrant. They may inspect records, remove documents, make audio or video recordings, question individuals, and institutions must not obstruct. Inspection powers are serious powers. They are justified when addressing genuine misconduct, but we must ensure that they are appropriate. Is there a clear guidance on frequency of inspections? Are there protections for confidential academic materials? Are there safeguards against these kinds of expeditions? Oversight is necessary. It must remain targeted but not intrusive by default. Clause 18 permits cancellation of designation and bars reapplication for up to 3 years. 3 years in a sector built on enrollment cycles, international recruitment timelines, and immigration coordination. A 3-year ban is not a minor administrative consequence. It can effectively close an institution's international program. Now let's look at the appeals. Clause 21 establishes the appeal process. Appeals must be filed within 30 days. They require a prescribed fee. They may be based only on limited grounds. And crucially, the commencement of an appeal does not stay with the decision. What does that mean? Appeals don't automatically stay with the decision, so an institution's designation may be cancelled immediately, even while appealing. Madam Speaker, that's not a small detail. This is a fundamental procedural issue, and due process is not just the right to appeal, it is meaningful appeal. If operations collapse before appeal is heard, what remedies remains? What happens to the students caught in the middle? In Clause 19, it allows an institution whose certificate is cancelled to continue providing programs to already enrolled international students. That's important. But it is subject to the administrator rules. Students may face visa complications, uncertainty about credential recognition, loss of confidence from families abroad, housing disruptions, employment impacts. International students are not statistics. They are young people navigating a foreign system. When regulatory actions occur, communication must be immediate, transparent, and coordinated with federal immigration authorities. Does this bill mandate that coordination? It does not clearly say so. Clause 9 requires a public directory of designated and former designated institutions. It allows publication of enforcement actions and, if authorized by regulation, publication of personal information deemed in the public interest. Transparency matters, but reputational damage, especially if decisions are later overturned, is reversible. If there's a requirement to update directory entries, is there a requirement to update directory entries if appeals succeed? Is there a clear standard for what personal information may be published? This balance must be handled with precision. Clause 24 allows the administrator to make binding rules on a wide range of matters: instructional delivery methods, in-class proportions, reporting obligations, student policy requirements, notification requirements, use of designation mark. These rules may establish different classes, adopt external standards, and evolve over time. Madam Speaker, this is a delegated legislative authority. It is powerful, and it exists largely outside of this chamber. We must ensure that rulemaking remains transparent and consultative. Clause 31. Clause 31 provides immunity from legal proceedings for the administrator and appeal officer acting in good faith. Clause 32 exempts the Act from Section 5 of the Offence Act. These may be technical provisions, but technical does not mean trivial. When we grant enforcement authority, inspection power, and cancellation power, injunction power, and immunity, we must ensure checks exist. Accountability must run both ways. Madam Speaker, let me be clear. We believe in protecting international students. We believe in removing bad actors. We believe British Columbia's reputation must be upheld. But legislation of this scope demands careful implementation. Power concentrated in a single administrator's office must be exercised with restraint. Appeal processes must be meaningful. Inspection powers must be transparent. Student welfare must remain central. And the regulatory ambition must not become regulatory overreach. This chamber must ensure that in protecting students, we do not undermine the institutional stability. In safeguarding reputation, we do not sacrifice fairness. In straightening oversight, we do not erode due process. Madam Speaker, international students choose British Columbia because they trust our system. Let's ensure that trust is strengthened and not shaken by the way we implement this act. There's another aspect of this legislation that deserves serious attention, and that is the injunction power set out in Clause 20. Under this provision, the administrator may apply to the Supreme Court for an injunction if there are reasonable grounds to believe that a person has violated or is likely to violate the requirement to hold a designation certificate or prohibit against a false representation. Now, at first glance, that may be straightforward, but in subsection 23 does something unusual. It directs the court to give greater weight to the enforcement of this act than to continue operation of the institution. And it explicitly states that the administrator need not establish irreparable harm. Madam Speaker, this is a significant departure from the traditional balance courts apply in injunction proceedings. Typically, courts weigh irreparable harm and the balance of convenience carefully. Here, the statute instructs the court to prioritize enforcement. Again, I understand the rationale to prevent rogue operators from continuing harmful practices. But we must ask, are we confident that this threshold protects against unintended consequences? Are we confident that legitimate institutions facing complex administrative disputes will not be caught in sweeping enforcement action? Because once an injunction is granted, reputational damage is immediate, and in international education, reputation is everything. We must also consider the regulation-making authority in Clause 33. This provision gives the Lieutenant Governor and Council broad power to regulate education agents, including vetting, contract, and monitoring requirements. Madam Speaker, education agents are a critical part of the international recruitment ecosystem. In many countries, students rely on agents to navigate complex visa and institutional processes. If those agents are poorly regulated, students can be absolutely harmed. But if the regulatory burden becomes excessive or unclear, institutions, especially smaller private institutions, may withdraw from international recruitment altogether. We must ensure that oversight of agents improves integrity without cutting off legitimate access points for students. Regulation must target bad actors, not suffocate responsible operators. Another area that warrants discussion is personal information. Clause 30 authorized the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information for administrating the Act. The directory provisions in Clause 9 allow publication of information, including personal information, if deemed in the public interest and authorized by regulation. Transparency is important, but privacy protection is also important. We must ensure that the threshold for publishing personal information is clearly defined, consistently applied. International students already face vulnerability, immigration status, housing insecurity, financial strain. They must not become collateral damage in public enforcement messaging. Madam Speaker, let me return to the first principles. International education is not merely an economic driver. It is a human story. It is a 19-year-old arriving in Vancouver for the first time. It is a family in another country investing their life savings in tuition. It is a graduate who hopes to build a life here and contribute to our economy. We must protect them. This is a non-negotiable, but protection must be grounded in fairness and clarity. This legislation replaces a policy framework with a statutory system. That shifts brings strength, but it also brings responsibility. Because once power is written into law, it endures. And when we legislate enforcement authority of this magnitude, we must be certain that we have built in the right safeguards. British Columbia's reputation depends not only on removing bad actors. It depends on demonstrating we are fair, predictable, transparent, and principled. That is the balance we must strike. That is the balance we will continue to insist upon as this bill continues. Madam Speaker, at its core, this legislation asks us to trust that concentrated authority will always be exercised wisely. It asks institutions to trust that discretion will be always fair. It asks students to trust that enforcement will never destabilize their future. Trust is important. But in governance, trust must be reinforced by structure, because good intentions do not substitute for safeguards, and strong powers must be matched with strong accountability. We cannot say to international students, "You are protected," while building a framework that allows sudden cancellations without interim protection. We cannot say to institutions, "You have the right to appeal," while ensuring that the consequences take effect immediately and publicly. We cannot say to the world, "British Columbia is a stable destination," if our regulatory model creates unpredictability. Oversight must inspire confidence, not anxiety. Madam Speaker, this is not a This is not a debate about whether bad actors should be removed. They should. This is a debate about whether good actors are given clear rules, fair processes, and proportionate remedies. The strength of a regulatory system is not measured by how quickly it can be punished. It is measured by how consistently it can apply standards. And consistency requires guardrails. Madam Speaker, I have talked through some structural risks, but I do want to just talk through some solutions. I want to propose some safeguards and some balance. I want to propose some improvements that strengthen protection and not weaken it. And I want to say again, on this side of the House, we support protecting international students, and we support removing bad actors, and we support transparency. But we also believe that strong oversight and procedural fairness must exist together. That is the balance. We can protect students and preserve fairness at the same time. This is not a choice between compassion and accountability. It is about designing a system that achieves both. First, this legislation shall allow for structured interim relief during appeals in the appropriate cases, not automatic stays, not blanket suspensions, but a narrow, criteria-based mechanism allowing the appeal officer to grant temporary relief where students are at risk, public safety is not compromised, there is credible evidence of procedural error. This would not protect bad actors, but it would protect due process. An appeal should be meaningful and not symbolic. Second, the online directory must include safeguards. If enforcement actions are published, there must be clear criteria for what is disclosed, immediate updates when decisions are varied or rescinded, defined timelines for how long information remains posted. Transparency builds trust, but permanent reputable damage from overturned decisions undermines it. Third, before major administrative rules take effect, especially those affecting instructional delivery models or compliance burdens, there should be a structured consultation. International education is dynamic. Federal immigration policies shift, housing pressures fluctuate, institutions need stability. When rules change, consultation should come first and not after. Madam Speaker, this bill has the potential to strengthen British Columbia's reputation. But reputation is not built through authority alone. It is built through fairness, predictability, independence, transparency. And if we incorporate safeguards into this act, we will not only protect students, we will protect trust. And trust is the foundation for international education. At the heart of this debate are young people. Most of our international students coming from other countries are youth. Young people who leave their homes and their families, and they choose British Columbia. They arrive with ambition and hope, and they arrive believing that this province offers opportunity, stability, and integrity, and we must not forget that. This legislation is about protecting them, and that is a responsibility we all share. But our protection must be thoughtful and fair. It must be structured in a way that builds confidence and not fear. Because international education is not just a revenue stream, it is not just enrollment data, it is human lives, it is human future, it's human trust, When a student chooses British Columbia, they are placing their future in our hands. And when an institution earns designation, it is replacing its reputation into our regulatory framework. And when this legislation grants enforcement authority, we are placing power into structure. And that structure must be strong, and it must also be just. The strength of our system will not be measured on how quickly we can cancel it, but how fairly we can govern it. If we get it right, we will protect students and we will uphold institutional integrity. If we get it right, we will send a message to the world that British Columbia remains a place where quality, accountability, and justice coexist. This is the balance we must strike. This is the responsibility before us, and this is the standard we must meet. Thank you, Madam Speaker.